Well, you can tell from your bulletins, if you have them, or the slide up there, that my sermon title is, Why Don't People Need Church Anymore? And we got into that a little bit, except we were focusing on why people need church, why people come to church, and why they then resist coming to church sometimes. All of us, as I said earlier, who are here, on some level need church, or we wouldn't be here. But there are times, as we've already established, that we don't want to be here. Sometimes it's for the reasons we already talked about. We want to sleep in, we're tired, a relative is making us come and we're annoyed. Other times it's for reasons that are less ordinary. There's been a death in the family, for example, and dealing with anything other than our grief is too much, even if it's people trying to help us. On those particular times, we feel like we don't need church, or at least the people in the church. The story I started to tell, or told part of, in the children's sermon about, as I called her, my hero of faith, Helen Gilpin, one of my heroes of faith from this very church. I didn't tell you the whole story, at least as Helen told me. After her husband died, she needed church, but just didn't want to mess with the people. That's my language, not hers. So she came to church. I believe she said she sat in the back row and then she left immediately, so she wouldn't have to see anyone. I did something similar, as I mentioned before. I went to my husband's church where I didn't know as many people. And I was fairly certain that most of the people there wouldn't have known my father had passed away. The priest did, and he announced it to the whole church, which is very kind of him. But I kind of, again, church found me even though I didn't want it to. And so then afterwards, people did come up to me and express their sympathies. Why is it so difficult to accept heartfelt love from other people in times of great emotional and spiritual stress? Why do we run from the church when we need it most? I'm going to get into that, I think, a bit in the sermon. And so if you'll bear with me, we'll sally forth. The answer to the question, why don't people need church anymore, I'm not sure of. Obviously, some people need church and we're here. But even we don't need it all the time, or feel like we don't need it or want it all the time. And there are lots of people who are church members who don't come very often. Why is that? Why are we no longer living in Mayberry, if we ever were Andy Griffith fans, where, Aunt Bee's roast, Sunday roast, following church are pretty much the only game in town? Life today just doesn't really support that model, I guess you could say. Like a lot of people who go to church and a lot of people who study churches, I have theories about why this has happened. Why people don't seem to want or need church in their life as much, even people who are members of churches. In preparing for this sermon, I discovered lots of other people have theories, and some of them actually were very illuminating to me, and they were even backed by statistical evidence. So I thought, okay, once I discover that, maybe I'll find more of an answer as to why our wonderful community seems to shrink rather than grow. All right, maybe I just need to thoroughly explore the evidence and then formulate a clear, at least pseudo-scientific or logical theory based on that. Maybe then I'll discover why, going back to our readings for this morning, people feel less like, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He provides, I'm paraphrasing and summarizing here, he essentially provides for my every need. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. Why do not more of us adhere to that? And we're more like, now who is this Jesus guy? Isn't he like a carpenter or something? And why should we listen to him? So let me get to the research. A little bit of background here. According to a 2016 Gallup poll, so it's 2 years old, 89% of Americans polled said they believed in the existence of God. Okay, if you're going to be a Christian, that's a good start. Let's move up. 72% of those people polled said that they identify themselves as adherents of Christian faith traditions, including Protestantism, Catholicism, Mormonism, and Christianity in a non-Protestant, non-Catholic, non-Mormon sense. Okay, so 72% of Americans consider themselves to be some sort of Christian, and those seem like pretty good numbers. We're not to the church part yet, though. Only 55% of those polled said they actually belonged to specific houses of worship, and that 55% did not just include people who consider themselves Christians. It also included people who worship at Jewish and Muslim houses of worship. All right. So essentially, if you want to draw some sort of conclusion, in 2016, when that poll was taken, around 50% of Americans were actually members of a specific Christian church. Now, that's a sizable gap between the number of people who consider themselves Christians and the number of people who actually belong to a church. Those people who are Christian but not church members perhaps participate in various churches but aren't a member. The poll didn't really cover that. Or maybe they don't go to church much at all. I'm not sure. Something else to keep in mind, though, is that there's an even bigger gap between the number of people who belong to a church and those who actively attend. That's not a surprise to anyone who's a member of a church, right? Including this one. Dave Morrow, who writes the blog Church for Men, discovered after discussion with leaders of a large church in Arizona that those church members who are most highly prized, highly desired by almost every church, families with young children, attend worship an average of about 1.5 Sundays a month. Only about 20% of that particular church's entire membership attended as many as 3 times a month. And only 4% were considered kind of full-time attendees. They attended 48 out of the 50, how many Sundays are there? 53 often. 52 weeks, sometimes do we have more than 52 Sundays? I'm not sure. At least 52, 48 out of the 52 or so times per year. So that's not a whole lot of participation in church. Why? Those statistics, the last set of statistics I cited from that large Arizona church, I don't have evidence saying that that's key, that's true for every single church, or that's even average. But it does give you thought. Why? Why is this so? Now, the theorists that I read, and I'm one of the theorists, by the way, have a lot of theories, right? And I'm sure you have experienced this as well. Kids, and kids. Kids in our culture today are allowed, even encouraged, to be involved in a zillion activities at the same time. And My friends with kids tell me that it is absolutely expected that if you are a good parent, you will be involved in your children's activities in some way. Some people take that as attending every single volleyball game. Other people take that as going further and providing snacks for the team after every single volleyball game. Other people go even further and volunteering as an assistant coach on your child's volleyball team. And that's only one activity. Kids are involved in multiple activities now at the same time. And so imagine what parents, many of whom work full-time jobs, imagine their schedules. Kids go to school and do their activities, parents work, do their kids' activities, and then maybe have a few activities of their own, maybe, if they're lucky. They sneak in sleep and food in between the activities and work and school. So it comes as no surprise then that when Sunday rolls around, if they don't have any activities or if they have fewer activities on Sunday, they may want to sleep in. And Sunday is not immune from kid activities, not by a long shot. Traveling sports teams play on Sundays. And of course, there are lots of community activities that are held on Sundays. Now, that wouldn't have happened in Mayberry. In Mayberry, the only activity is maybe a band concert or a church-sponsored ice cream social. But we're not in Mayberry. Some would say that's a good thing, others maybe not so much, but that is the reality. All right, so people are overscheduled. That's one reason church takes a back seat. Another reason might be work. It used to be in the olden times, yes, in the days of Mayberry, but in reality, in the days of Kansas, in Iola, businesses were closed on Sundays. You couldn't work. No one worked. The only person who worked was the pastor. And as I may have mentioned earlier, in my reference to Aunt Bee's pot roast, church was the only pretty much gig in town. It was before social media, it was before computers, it was before the internet, and again, it was before massive kid activities. Before community and cultural events that were not church-related were scheduled on Sundays. And so there are lots of other things that compete with church, including work. Businesses are open. I have a friend from this congregation who says essentially that even though she's not open on Sunday, she needs Sunday for a smidge of downtime, but then to prepare for her business. I know we have congregation members here who can't attend because they actually work on Sundays. So that's changed about our culture. Sometimes work and other things, not just organized kid activities, interfere. Another thing, too, family time replaces church time. Now, I mentioned earlier the example of the family that's so scheduled that the only time they might have free is Sunday. And so they just need some downtime. The parents need downtime, the kids need downtime if they're not in traveling sports teams, etc. But what I'm saying here goes beyond that. I have a friend who was raised in the church, who attended church all her life, who taught at a church-related school, and who was a regular church attender until her two young boys started acting up in church. And they behaved horribly. She couldn't control them. They had an older daughter who was an angel, so they were not prepared for these two younger boys when they came along. And she was so embarrassed and it was such a hassle to take them to church, they just stopped going. But then by the time the boys got older, they had already made Sunday, in many ways, when the boys weren't in activities, by the way, family time. They'd go to the lake and camp. They'd go fishing. When one of the boys did have a sports activity, the entire family went, not just the parents. When I commented on her devotion to her family activities, and I said, I really don't see how you do it, she said, I don't know what I'd be doing if I weren't with my family. My family is my life. And I didn't pointedly ask her at that point, do you go to church? Because that wasn't the conversation for that. I wasn't even thinking about that. But it later came up that they hadn't been back to church, not even for special occasions, since they stopped going because their 2 kids acted out. The focus shifted from church to family. And that was very sustaining and fulfilling for her. And she's not the only one, I know. Family activities become a type of worship. You cherish your time together. You cherish your bond. And that's a good thing. But it's yet more competition with church. And then you have kind of the more ordinary, obvious interferences with church. People just travel more. Even people who attend church all the time when they're home travel a lot. Their kids live out of town. Their parents live out of town. We're a more spread out people these days. And so traveling interferes with that. And there's no longer the expectation, at least among people my generation, that when you travel, you really should go to church. Some people do. My relatives who are Catholic are a lot better at doing that than my relatives who are Protestant, I have to tell you. I'm not good at it when I'm traveling. And it's considered kind of, you get a pass. And so you're not worshiping in your home church, you're not worshiping anywhere. And as, church, you get out of the habit of doing church a little bit, it's easier not to come at all. You also have the fact that people get burned out. Probably almost everyone who's here, you're a regular churchgoer, has felt burned out about church at least a little. Because if you participate in church, you either are asked to do a lot or you volunteer to do a lot. You do it, you say yes, out of love, because you want to be involved. But then, there is the risk of burning out. And sometimes people who get burned out on doing extra things for the church don't come to Sunday worship. Because, I'm doing these 5 other things. And they're missing out on the experience that happens here. Other people stay away from church for reasons that are maybe less understandable. Well, they're very human, maybe less understandable. They have a feud with another church member. I remember someone in a church that I belonged to telling me how angry she was that longtime member told her she wasn't polishing that brass church accessory the right way. And she was just, the longtime church member had been a member of the church longer than my friend. And yes, she was set in her ways, probably. But I was mystified as to why she couldn't just blow that off. But she was fuming. She was very angry about that. And I'm not sure that the older church member was aware that this younger church member had a feud with her, but the younger member was very much thought that. And obviously that's not a positive experience to associate with church. Some people have left churches because the particular pastor did not meet their needs, whatever those needs were. Or the pastor's sermons weren't good enough as they perceived it to be, or the pastor didn't do this and didn't do that and didn't do this. Pastors take a lot of heat for when you're talking about people who leave church. And then some people in more recent times, people have stayed away from church for what's essentially the same reason, but seems the polar opposite reasons, politics. I've talked to people who have said, their church is just too political. I've talked to people who say their church isn't political enough. They should be taking a stand on these things. I talked to one former member of this church who hasn't attended in probably 12 years, maybe. Politics has absolutely no place in church. But I'm not sure that's the reason he stopped attending. And I didn't pursue the conversation further. So there's a host of reasons that people feel that they don't want or they don't need church in their lives. And you can probably guess that I think at least some of these are perfectly understandable. Maybe all of them, if not laudable, understandable. So, knowing this, knowing that there are a host of reasons why people leave churches or are members but don't attend, or who, for whatever reason, don't feel what we feel and don't come to church regularly. What can we do with this information? How does this help us understand not only the question, it gives us some theories, but how can it help us with our faith walk? The fact that our churches shrink, I think, wears on us, doesn't it? You want to see the pews fuller. You want to have more people on your committee than 2. If nothing else, it gives us a psychological lift. But I think it also gives us a faith lift, too. Do we just say, the culture's changing, the church will figure out how to change with the culture, and we just got to have faith? Yeah, we can say that. And maybe that is the best answer. I don't know. Maybe we don't get quite that specific and just say, look, it's God's will, it'll work out. And maybe that's the way to approach it too. Is there any wisdom we can turn to that might help us feel a little more enlightened or a little more satisfied on this subject than just have faith, it'll work out? That's true. But we often want more than that, don't we? Well, let's go back and look at those readings for today. The first one was the 23rd Psalm, which actually wasn't part of the lectionary for today, the list of suggested scripture that you might use and tie your sermon to. The 24th Psalm was, but Gail told me I didn't need to stick to the lectionary, so I just moved one psalm over because of the picture that is painted in the psalm that is so peaceful, reassuring, all-encompassing. God with us, God with me, God with the church. Extrapolating just a little bit. When I try to recite the 23rd Psalm from memory, there are parts that I forget. I shouldn't, but I do. And I think somehow they're telling. Now I'm going to recite it from memory the way I usually do in my head when I'm trying to fall asleep or feeling stressed about something. And then we'll look at the parts I leave out. Okay, this is usually what I say. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I also sometimes goof things up a little bit. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. I'm doing the King James thing here. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. Then I skip. I know this is a skip. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. Thy rod and thy staff, they comforteth me. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord. Okay, so what did I leave out, William? I know you were following. What did I leave out? That's okay. That's all. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, sorry. What did I leave out? Yes, I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That kind of finality. I also forgot a really vital line. He restores my soul, I think. I skipped right from he leads me beside still waters to even though I walk through the valley of the... So I forgot he restores, or as I like to say it in my head, he restoreth my soul. I also forgot he leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And righteousness can also be translated as justice, fairness, rightness. It doesn't have an exact, precise meaning. But in other words, he helps me to do right. He helps me to do good. Do things that are just. So I forgot that. I forgot after, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. I forgot, for you are with me. I skipped to thy rod and thy staff, they comforteth me. But you are with me is between there. I forgot, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Okay, I'm sharing this with you not because I want you to psychoanalyze me. That would be creepy, but and quite frankly, inappropriate for this session. But I'm using myself, I think, as a stand-in for a type of typical person. It's probably redundant, a typical person. I forgot he restoreth my soul. I forgot, for you are with me. I forgot, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. And I forgot, forever. Are those important concepts? Thank you. I think they are. God feeds us. God makes us, and God anoints us. He reminds us that we're holy, that we're better than we think we are. He's with us. He restores our soul. Family is awesome. Family can make us feel whole. But does family provide spirit? Does family provide God? In our busy lives, we tend to, I think sometimes, look at church and go, okay, that's just my friends. They're good people, I like them, they annoy me. I'll see them later. Just like the people in the Mark passage looked at Jesus and said, yeah, the things he's saying are sort of impressive, but who is he to be saying that stuff? He's just that carpenter guy. We know his family. There's nothing special about him. They didn't believe. When we downplay the fact that genuine spiritual transcendence can happen in church, even if it's with a bunch of people who are just friends, that can happen because God is with us. then we forget how much we really need church. Amen. Because I spoke so long, we'll do an